Good morning, everyone. Zal ik maar zeggen, goedemorgen allemaal. It's always a pleasure for me to be in the Netherlands. I love coming here. And about a year ago, I was being interviewed by a journalist on CNBC. And she had just seen a report from BCG which talked about the most innovative countries in the world. Where was innovation the most? And this report stated that the most innovative country in the world was Singapore. And she asked me what my view on that was. And I said, I have to say I have a different point of view on that. Singapore doesn't strike me as number one in the world for innovation. And she said, you know, you have in your report here something about the Netherlands. Why do you think the Netherlands is so innovative? And I said, well, think of it. In the Netherlands, this is the only country in the world where when they ran out of land, rather than attacking their neighbors, they moved the ocean. You know, right? So, but I'll tell you a story about innovation. Alan Kay once said that a great point of view will add 70 points to your IQ. Okay? I say, if you have no point of view, you're left with what you were biologically given, and a bad point of view will take 70 points away from your IQ. So I think the point of departure of what I want to say today is let's get a point of view, let's get a perspective, let's develop a concept or an idea of what's going on to get some competitive advantage. And ultimately what I'm looking for, what for me intellectual capital is all about, is the next practice, not best practices. If we execute best practices, what can we achieve? Parity. It's only through next practices that we can actually achieve leadership and competitive advantage. It does us no good to be executing best practices. We should be looking for the next practices, and that's what I'm so excited about and why I'm here and been coming here for 5 years. Because this is where the best practices or the next practices are emerging. So how do we do that? How do we see what a best practice is? First of all, a practice is something that's basically either extremely unique or very practical. And so we look out in the marketplace and we try to identify what's going on. And if we see something that's not terribly unique and not very practical, we call that the boring bad practices, right? The stuff that no one is going to adopt, very low risk of adoption because they're obviously not working. The stuff that we really have to be careful about is the stuff that's very, very unique and isn't very practical, and that's what I call the exciting bad theory. And that's the category I would put Marxism and communism in, right? It's exciting. I mean, all the workers of the world unite to do what? Well, let's put the people in gulags. You know, that's the end result. It's such a bad idea. It doesn't work anywhere. But even today, you'll hear people saying it's a great idea, it just doesn't work. And if we go and we look at best practices are nothing more than those things which work very well and are quite common. They're easy to find, we can see what's there, so we execute best practices. Next practices are all about what works very, very well, but is very, very unique. And the reason I disagreed with the journalist last year is because I don't think it's a matter of predicting the future. I don't think it's a matter of seeing what's next. I think it's a matter of observing that, in fact, what William Gibson said is very much true, that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And here in Putin is where you've got a heavy distribution of the future, right? That's why we're here. This is where the future shows up first. When I think of innovation, I think of the Netherlands, I think of Silicon Valley, I think of Israel, and I think of India. That's where I go to see innovations, because the sun generally rises there first before anywhere else. My daughter, who's in the fashion industry in New York, she's a digital artist in the fashion industry, told me one of their techniques for figuring out how to forecast the future is they go to 4 cities. They go to New York, they go to London, they go to Paris, and they go to Tokyo. Because what they've seen is that every year, it doesn't matter what fashion trend, it shows up in one of those cities first. And so for us, next practice is identifying where the future shows up first. And that's why I've been so pleased to come here and spend time with Jan, because the future just happened to show up in Putin in the Netherlands, not because there were more patents filed here, not because they had better GDP, not because they had more education for everyone. It just so happens that this is where it showed up. So that's why we're so excited about the relationship we've had with Cordial and why we think this is the future of IT. This is where IT is going. If you want to see that, come to Putin, come to Silicon Valley, come to India, come to Israel. That's where the innovation's taking place, in my view, around the world. So in our research, we came across the following. We call this the Janus dilemma, which is what every single CIO is faced with right now. Janus was the Roman god who saw both the past and the future. And he could see both of them at the same time, and that had created quite a dilemma. And every CIO that I speak with today is living in this dilemma, where there's the legacy, the environment, the cost reduction, the focus on cost reduction, dealing with all the complexity that's been left from all these IT systems, and yet focusing on the future, which is all about agility. It's all about the value creation. It's looking outside into the organization. And those CIOs that are focusing only on the left-hand side of the equation are having a very, very miserable time. They're under cost pressure. They're generally reporting to the CFO. They're not enjoying life very much. They're not appreciated. I had dinner several weeks ago with 20 CIOs in New York, and they all told me the same thing. No one likes us anymore. We used to be really popular. We used to be like the high priest of technology. We could speak in a language that no one would understand. And they would just give us money and we would solve problems. No longer today. Everyone knows more about technology now than the CIO. The CIO spends more money than they should be spending, and their life is terrible. And then you have those CIOs that focus on the right-hand side of the equation. And those are generally unemployed. Okay? Those are the people that are unemployed. And the key to being a good CIO today, in our view, is a balance between the two. Living in the world of the Janus dilemma, of focusing on existing operations, making sure the lights don't go out, making sure the costs are kept low, and innovating at the same time. And the value of the Cordial platform, from my point of view, is it enables you to do both of those. It's not just about going into the future. It's not just about living in the past. It's about having that balance. So the research I'm going to show you right now comes from our work of working with clients, working with academics, bringing it all together, bringing good theory, good practice together, and that's the work that we're doing with our clients. So, the key agenda on this right-hand side of the equation is agility. Every CIO is feeling incredibly constrained. The chairman comes in and wants his iPad connected to the network. All the kids that they're hiring don't want to work with a lockdown desktop. They want to work with their own device. Everyone thinks that, and I hear this a lot, well, these kids are so savvy with technology. These kids are not savvy with technology. They are savvy with devices. It's a very different world. Ask them about how an ERP system works. Talk about the complexity of running an integrated network. They have no idea what that is, but they know how to work their Google apps, and they know how to work that. They have multiple devices, and they're constantly multiplexing. They cannot communicate with you in English anymore. It's all texting and responding back and forth. But that's what the CIO has to deal with. Has to deal with the fact it's lost control. The CIO can no longer dictate technology. No longer are all the budgets there. One of the most dysfunctional relationships in business today is between the marketing department and the CIO. The marketing department is more sophisticated in the use of cloud technology than the CIO. And they all have to respond quickly. They have to change. They have to bring on new partners, adopt new customers, develop new distribution channels. All of this stuff is a terrible world for the CIO today. It's a really very difficult experience because at the same time, if the lights go out and the data center goes down, they're fired. And if they don't respond, their career is over. So it's a very challenging environment, and what Cordial has brought is a solution to that problem, to enable that agility to take place in order for the organization to be able to do that. So how are they actually doing it? Well, let's go back a bit to the evolution of the IT industry. At the beginning, the CIO was basically running a factory, producing a lot of software, writing a lot of code, building networks, running data centers, executing IT, and delivering it to the business. That was the model that CIOs were operating in for a very long period of time. That then evolved, and today, the CIO is more like running the company store. He's buying applications and integrating them, buying networks and integrating them, buying SaaS services and integrating them. It becomes more of a purchasing capability, more of an integrating capability, rather than a production capability. And the use of all these new technologies is forcing the company to operate in that model. And the cost pressure is driving down into the company store model. So that's the model that most CIOs are operating in today. They're running a company store. They're not running a factory anymore. And it's a very uncomfortable position because the CIO has traditionally been very operational, very focused on executing what's going on. But they've got regulatory requirements, they've got cost pressures going on, they've got all these things happening in the company store. And the solution in part of that migration was ERP. Let's implement ERP. ERP will give us the integration of the data. It will give us the ability to execute processes across the enterprise. And virtually everyone implemented ERP at some point. And I am not a critic of ERP. I think Jan is absolutely correct. ERP is necessary, but it's an insufficient condition to run an enterprise-wide agility program. Because ERP was fundamentally created pre-internet, and it was about data integration. It was about integrating data across the enterprise. The internet changed all that. Integration of the data no longer became the problem. It became the issue of integration of the processes across the enterprise. And so the CIOs left with this legacy environment, and they wanted to go wall to wall with ERP. Because ERP solved the problem inside the enterprise, therefore let's put it right to the edges. And that problem is that no longer works. You can't change ERP quickly enough. It is not agile enough as an architecture. It is an architecture that is designed to stabilize, to simplify, to execute efficiently existing processes that are well defined and to integrate data into the enterprise. It doesn't work when you're working in an ecosystem that's dynamically changing and you need to share processes across the enterprise and the cloud. It's just not designed for that. And if companies keep on modifying ERP to operate like it should in the cloud, that's when you end up with all these changes that it becomes completely unmanageable. And that's the challenge that all of our clients have. And it's a little like in a house, right? When houses were first built, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have plumbing, they didn't have heating. They basically provided shelter. And then all of a sudden we put in heating, we put in lighting, we put in electricity, we wire the house, we make it very comfortable to improve our environment. And all that stuff becomes necessary but insufficient. And the example I would give between ERP and the Cordial platform is that ERP is basically the wiring in the house, it's the plumbing in the house, it's the toilets, it's the ovens, it's the infrastructure utilities that work, and Cordial is the light switch. Cordial is the thermostat. Cordial are the tools and utilities that we have to make it all work better. It's not something that replaces it. Cordial doesn't replace ERP. It enables ERP to function better in the enterprise because you're not trying to get the ERP to be doing everything in the enterprise. You're allowing a technology that works at a process level to be able to do that. And what happens is with all the longer this stuff stays in the organization, the more sclerotic it becomes, the more difficult it is for the enterprise to function. And the processes, the procedures, the organizational structures remain embedded in the organization, and it's very, very difficult to change. So what's happening now is this company store model is breaking down. Because the enterprise needs this increased agility, because it needs to focus on other things, this company store model is breaking down, and we see three models emerging. One is what we call the studio model, where the IT organization is behaving like a studio that produces a movie. It engages with the business, very strategic projects, combined multidisciplinary teams to develop something that's very strategic for the business. The other company store model is something called the Home Depot model, or do it yourself. I don't know what the equivalent is here in the Netherlands, but when you go to Home Depot in the United States, you go in there to buy something because you do it yourself. And increasingly, the users do technology themselves. They no longer need the sophisticated help of the IT organization. They know what they're doing. They're just looking for a little advice on the tools. You go in and you get a little bit of consulting about the tools. You adopt the tools going forward, and that's one of the models that we're seeing IT organizations exist in. And then finally is the process manager, where the IT organization is focused on executing processes and making processes very simple and very well defined. One of the things that's changing, and one of the things that CIOs are doing that we find very effective, is the perspective on how we come into this is very important. And IT has traditionally been outside, looking from inside out, looking at capabilities they have and how can they make them available. And companies generally look from inside out. And the metaphor that I would give you on that is the metaphor of hunting. You basically segment your target and shoot. The better your aim, the better the segmentation, the more likely you're going to have success. We think the future is about fishing. You can't segment the fish in the water. For the most part, you can't even see them. What you do is you make your lure so attractive that the fish come to the lure. And that's what enterprises that are really successful with the agility agenda are doing, is they're making their enterprise so attractive that the fish comes to the hook, not them trying to shoot them. And it's a very subtle distinction, but it's very, very important. And rather than focusing on all the methods, the processes, the techniques for the superior segmentation and identification of customers and identifying the weapons with which you're going to go after the customers, you even hear terms like targets. These are our target markets, right? We go look at fishing and come up with the right lure. How can we make our company more attractive to people to be able to? That's what the CIO's challenge is right now. How can we make this enterprise more attractive to bring customers in, because we can no longer target them, we can no longer segment, we can no longer go hunting, we need to go fishing. And what's driving it again is the consumer's ad platform. Everyone wants to have their own device. They want to determine how they want to engage with the company, not the company saying, well, this is the way you're going to do business with us. And they want to come in with their iPads, they want to come in with their iPhones, and they don't want just iPhone support, they want Droid support, they want BlackBerry support, they want to be able to come in any way they want to be able to come in, because that's the world they're living in. And the CIO that says, no, we're not going to be able to support that, has got a big problem. So we think there's 4 models emerging for how the CIO can deploy that capability. And the 4 models in which they're operating in is, if you take a look on the one hand, the stuff that's run in-house and is basically tightly integrated, that's the world of ERP. That's the world where everything was done in the organization, all the functions were deployed there, all the processes were deployed there, everything was executed there. What we're seeing is the separation, if you will, between that legacy ERP environment and a set of services buses, a service architectures that enables change to be taken outside of that. And this is the approach very much that Jan has been at the forefront of defining, is figuring out how to decouple, if you will, all that functionality from the legacy enterprise applications. Other organizations are taking an approach of buying services outside on the cloud, SaaS services, acquiring those and then integrating them into the enterprise. And other corporations are taking the architecture of TEB services, where the front end of the business is what they're acquiring on that basis. And we have many, many examples of organizations taking the 4 different types of approach, but the one thing that is common in all of them, whether they're going into a decoupling of the ERP environment and remaining in an enterprise estate, or whether they're working in more of a TEBS environment or more of a SaaS environment, is they're all trying to get out of the tightly coupled, inbuilt, integrated ERP systems. So the trend is away from that lower end of the quadrant. And depending on the strategy of the organization, depending on where their emphasis is, their products, their business model, and so on and so forth, we're seeing this direction that every single company is going with. And the CIO's challenge is to come up with the right architecture to be able to address that. So this is what we think kind of the future state architecture for all of the CIOs is that we're working with, that are trying to get greater levels of agility. At the bottom of it, they have their kind of IT, HR, legacy, finance application. Master data management, it remains an enduring problem, remains an enduring challenge, particularly for the structured data inside the enterprise. Now, big data enters into this, and they need to be able to work with unstructured data, so there's architectural changes they need to take into consideration. But there's kind of a homogeneous approach to this back office. And then there's the process and program integration against all the applications, and then creation of this one face to the customer, so that all of this looks very, very seamless. And this is a really important issue that we've seen, which is that IT is not becoming less complex. It's becoming less complex to the user. And that's why it's so easy for people to adopt the technology, because the new technologies and the new inventions and the new devices have made technology easy for people to use, but the complexity is now moved into the back. It's moved into the world of the CIO. And therefore, this is the age of the architects. If there ever was a need for good architects, it's now, because figuring out how to, because you can't just simplify everything. You can only simplify where you need to simplify, and where the simplification is taking place is making it really easy for users to be able to do that. I mean, if you go out and you buy an iPad today, who's ever received a manual on how to work it? I remember getting cell phones, 10, 15 years ago, and you had to read the manual to figure out how to work the phone. Well, you knew that was designed by an engineer, right? Because it was very capable, very sophisticated, and very difficult to use. Today, no one would ever dream of giving a manual for a mobile phone. No one would dream for ever giving out a manual for the iPad. So the simplification has taken place at the front end, but do you think the complexity has diminished in the back end? Just to the contrary. It's a more technically sophisticated environment than ever before, and that complexity will continue as the simplification continues at the front end of the house. And what's happening is that simplification or that agility agenda is all about the front end of the business. It's not about the back end of the business. The back end of the business remains very structured, very process-centric, very capable of executing efficiently and reliably, but the change and the agility is all at the front end of the business. And what do we mean by the front end of the business? We're talking about the stuff in terms of product IT, where the IT organization is engaged with the business in creating new products. It's about value creation platforms, building platforms for the enterprise to offer things to the market differently. It's about customer-facing applications that enable the organization to engage with the customer. It's about ecosystem environments where the applications are built to integrate with the rest of the environment. And then finally, it's about employee engagement. The employees want to be engaged in a very different way. It's why we see social networking entering into the enterprise like never before. Virtually every company we're talking to is trying to figure out how to do social inside the enterprise. It's no longer adequate to do Microsoft SharePoint. It's no longer adequate to basically have Lotus Notes. It's no longer adequate to have these environments for collaboration. People want to engage in the office the way they engaged at home. And we saw this trend 10, 15 years ago. When we really noticed it was coming was in 2005 when we did a joint study with the FT, which basically we asked the question, is your IT better at home or is it better in the office? And their statement was, well, now it's better at home than it is in the office, for the first time. You all remember, up until 2005, you basically had better IT inside the company than you did at home. Everything's switched very, very quickly, and IT is now better at the home than there is in the office, and the CIO is left with dealing with that agenda. That's why no one likes them anymore. That's why they're cutting off the budgets. That's why they're giving the money to the marketing department, because they want things very fast, very quick, and the CIO has to deal with all the legacy. An airline on the ground might be a good thing if that's where you want it. But if you don't want it there, it's not a good thing. An AOG condition, if you're running a corporate fleet of aircraft, is a very big problem. Because these aircraft are very expensive. When they go down, it's a lot of money that's on the ground. And so what happened is that Embraer, who builds these jets, has 400 aircraft all over the world that they're supporting. And if an airline went down on the ground, guess what happened? They'd call a phone number in Brazil, or they'd send a note to their Lotus Notes email system. Now, the only problem is all of the information about that aircraft was in their SAP system. So the person would have to go from the Lotus Notes system, walk over to the ERP system, key in the information, find out what was going on, go back over to the Lotus Notes system, engage in this. And you can imagine with 400 aircraft in the air, 400 aircraft, how many people were involved in all that. So we worked with Cordial, and we built a fantastic application. If you go down there, Jan and I were down there last year to see this in live, in production, where they have a big wall, and on the wall there's a Google map. So we use the mashup capabilities of Cordial to build a Google map, and everywhere there was a little red pin, there was an airline on the ground. And everywhere there was a little red pin where there was an airline on the ground, there was a screen that was created of the condition of that aircraft. Whether it needed a pilot, it needed a new engine, it needed a new avionics device. There was some issue, and it watched the process all the way through and the execution all the way through. And they left the SAP system the way it was. They left the Lotus Notes system the way it was, and it all became integrated at a much higher level. And that's a great example of this ability to execute agility strategies to respond to the customer while leaving all the legacy in route. You couldn't possibly replace all the SAP systems. But you could not build that application in SAP. Can you imagine building a workflow that dynamically gets reconfigured every time an aircraft goes down on the ground in SAP? I mean, forget it, would never happen. So we're actually able to do things that we couldn't do before by respecting and preserving the world of SAP, respecting the world of Lotus Notes systems, whatever you think of Lotus Notes systems, but being able to operate at a process level that's integrated from the tools, and they were able to dramatically reduce the number of people they had at the aircraft management services. and they were able to greatly improve the quality of service they had. And we've talked to customers who've gone and seen what they've done, and they said, absolutely amazing. We've never seen anything like this. And it was done in a very short period of time on that basis. So that's one example of this kind of agile architectural approach that's enabled by Cordial. And yesterday, you may have seen the press announcement that we just made where we've decided to invest in building a platform, a solution on the Cordial platform that addresses the increasing regulatory requirement that every financial institution is now facing. And this is a really interesting example of having to do things in the business world that have got nothing to do with creating value, but they have to do with regulatory compliance. So at the same time the CIO is dealing with all of this challenge to agility and being more flexible and being more adaptive and making the experience better for the user, they're also working in an increasingly punitive regulatory environment. I mean, if you are not compliant with all these regulations that are coming out there, you have a very big problem. And the beauty of the Cordial platform is it enables that architecture and that agility to be developed in both cases. So we believe that, in order to be able to access, and all these banks that have all the requirements, for those of you who are not familiar with FATCA, FATCA is a regulation that was decided in the United States that they wanted to know anyone who had a bank account who was a US citizen anywhere in the world. And if the bank doesn't tell them that they have that money and how much they're giving them in interest or how much they're giving them in dividends, then they can't do business in the United States. So how does the bank comply to that? It's got all this legacy environment, it's got all this data resident in these applications. They might not even know all the different accounts that the particular citizen has. So we believe that using the Cordial platform on top of the legacy environment gives us the ability to extract the data wherever we need it and assure the compliance of the processes across the business. So we're very confident that this is going to be a very good solution that's going to give us a lot of opportunities, particularly here in Europe, which is where we're launching it first, but we think elsewhere in the world. And it's not just for FATCA. It's for any sort of regulatory compliance or any sort of internal policy compliance issue. Because the biggest problem with policy compliance is the process. It's not the data. You can have the data, but you don't have a process that integrates it and automates across the enterprise. There's a big problem. So that's why we've launched it. We call it CSC Gate. It'll be available very, very soon. We're in final stages of production of it. We're in final stages of developing it. It's a very scalable architecture. We're offering it both on premises and in the cloud. We've been working with Cordial now over the last 6 months and designing it and building it. We have a couple of customers that we're in quite advanced conversations with about adopting the solution. And so I wanted to talk about just the ideas that we have and the solutions we're developing on the platform that are very consistent with the findings we have going forward. So with that, I've now finished the presentation part of it. We've left some time open for questions and answers. If anyone would like to raise a question, we can talk anything, even go back to 16th century Dutch history if you'd like, or we can talk about some of the agile challenges of architecture.
How could you bring this knowledge to the CEO of a big enterprise? Because that's often the problem, where you even mentioned that the CIOs are busy most times to procure and not to process. And how to bring this knowledge real in the boardroom?
Yeah, well, I think the two messages that resonate well with the CEO is the compliance regulatory issue, because they sign their names to the documents, and they get that wrong, they got a big problem. So they're very aware of that. And then also this issue of the customer, the focus on the customer. Because one thing that's happening with the technology in general is power is shifting from the supplier to the customer, and CEOs understand that. And they're very, by and large, very frustrated with IT because IT is not able to go quickly enough. They want IT to go faster. It's why they're diverting funding to the marketing department for these kind of initiatives. And Gartner just came out with a statement several weeks ago that they think by 2017, the marketing department will be spending more on IT than the CIO. So this is happening very, very fast, right? It's happening very, very fast. So I think it's focused on the board level message is customers. How can you better serve your customers? How can you better understand your customer? I mean, we look at the big data phenomena. It's all about understanding customers, right? Being able to serve customers better, being able to predict what they're going to do, being able to understand them better, and this regulatory compliance. It's not a technical argument. If we go in with a technology argument, they're lost. They're absolutely lost.
My name is JB Kim. I'm from Korea. You mentioned about next practice.
Right,
Next practice is better than best practice.
right.
So far, the best practice system has been ERP, CRM, SCM, and so on.
Right.
What could be the next best practice, next practice system in your mind? Cordial.
That's why we're here.
Okay.
That's
As another killer application.
This is a killer application. This is why I've been so passionate about this. When I first saw Jan 5 years ago, we met each other 5 years ago, immediately it was clear to me, this is the future of IT. This is the future of where it's going. It's not going to be, there's not going to be another big ERP application to develop. That's already been solved. And again, with due respect to ERP, it's a building block, it's a foundation. You cannot do Cordial without the ERP systems being there. We wouldn't even see the need. The introduction of the ERP and the internet has changed the world so that now we can see it. And this is not easy to sell, I can assure you. I've been working many years to work with customers to try to convince them of the merits of this. This is not easy, but I'm absolutely certain that this is the future of IT, working in a web-based, a cloud-based architecture that respects legacy, that integrates processes, that enables you to segment to a market of one, your understanding of the customer, to be able to engage in a very agile fashion while not destroying the legacy environment, is the future of IT. That's why this whole thing is so exciting. Sun rises first in Putin. Okay. The issue is a regulation comes down or a policy comes down that people need to comply with. It requires access to data and it requires process integration not only across the enterprise but across the ecosystem of the enterprise. How are you going to do that? You can do it manually. Yeah, you can do it. It's going to be very expensive to do it manually. Or you can recode all of your SAP systems or your Oracle systems to try to do that. Try that one, see how that works. Or you can take a very light architecture. Yeah, like I said, it's a little like the thermostat in the house. It's like the light switch in the house. It's like the devices that we use to fine-tune what we have to make the house a more comfortable environment is really what the Cordial platform is all about.
So for me, it's very interesting. We're all trying to convince our customers to make the move to BPMS on top of SAP or Cordial or whatever. But what is the main compelling reason to act for CIOs or chief marketing officers?
Well, it's because you need to respond to the marketplace. And I would take issue, and this is one of the problems I've had, right? Cordial is not a BPM tool. I repeat, Cordial is not a BPM tool. Cordial is a platform that enables the enterprise to live in both the future and the past. It resolves the Janus dilemma because it enables you to respect the legacy and still live in the future on that environment. And every time people try to put Cordial in the BPM space, or put it in the SOA grid space, or put it in the mashup space, or put it in the business operations place, they miss the point. The point is it's an integrated it's like the digital operating platform for the enterprise that's operating in a new world. And that's how I communicate it to customers, and that's what customers buy. They don't buy a BPM tool. If you go down to that rat hole, you'll never come out. You'll never, because they'll sit there and they'll compare, well, it's not as good as this, and it has the functionality of this, and so on and so forth. It's the integration that is the genius behind this solution. It's not the specific tool sets. In the same way that ERP was about data integration, because I used to be a field consultant where I would help customers figure out, do they go with ERP or they go in best-of-breed applications, right? And always the issue was, well, the functionality of ERP was less than the best-of-breed, but then I had the data integration issue. I had the interfaces I need to build, the interfaces I need to manage and maintain. Same thing with the Cordial platform. You can find BPM tools that are better than Cordial. You can find SOA grid tools that are better than Cordial. You can't find anyone who's integrated them the way they have to make it very easy to run a different platform. That's the value proposition that they have. Well, either I've thoroughly confused you or you guys already know the answer. So I confuse myself sometimes. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.